If you stand in the middle of a completely empty giant room, your brain kind of panics.
Oh, absolutely.
There's an echo. There's no reference point to ground you. You don't know where to stand or where to look or like what to do with your hands. It's just spatial chaos.
Yeah, the human mind basically rejects a vacuum. Without boundaries or markers, your nervous system just gets totally overwhelmed trying to process infinite possibilities.
Right. But the second you throw a rug on the floor and say, place a single chair in the corner,
the whole dynamic changes.
exactly. It's suddenly a living room.
Yeah.
You've given that empty space an architecture, and instantly the panic vanishes because you know exactly how to behave.
Right.
So welcome to another custom-tailored deep dive. I am incredibly excited to have you with us today because, well, the stack of sources you've shared with us, they all point to this massive invisible force shaping our lives.
Yeah, it's this concept of frameworks. Because at first glance, the materials we're looking at today might seem entirely disconnected. But beneath the surface, they are all essentially instruction manuals for building reality.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the underlying theme here is what we're calling the architecture of reality. We're exploring how humans use frameworks to navigate chaos, overcome fear, and construct the world we actually live in.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is intensely practical for you, the listener. Because whether you're trying to master a complex new skill without freezing up, or searching for a sense of peace in a chaotic world, or, simply trying to decode massive global geopolitical shifts.
Which is a lot to handle.
It is, but understanding these underlying frameworks gives you immense leverage. You stop reacting to the empty room, and you start arranging the furniture.
I love that. It's amazing how much our daily anxiety comes from just, not having a script. So let's start with a very specific, incredibly relatable kind of chaos.
Okay, let's do it.
The agonizing psychological freeze people experience when trying to speak a new language.
Oh, yeah. The worst feeling.
The sources focus specifically on English learners. And what's fascinating is that the panic isn't caused by a lack of vocabulary. It's a massive cognitive bottleneck.
Yeah, it's a processing load issue.
Yeah.
Very similar to a computer crashing, actually. When you're speaking a non-native language, your brain is essentially running an emulator.
Like it's running too many programs at once.
Precisely. You're translating thoughts from your native tongue, searching for target vocabulary, applying grammatical rules, and crucially running a high-alert social awareness program.
Oh, worrying about the judgment of the other person.
Exactly. You're spending all your mental RAM on the mechanics, so there is nothing left to actually drive the conversation.
The sources share this vivid anecdote that I think anyone who has learned a language can feel in their bones.
The coffee shop story.
Yes. So a learner is standing in a busy coffee shop. The barista asks how they want their drink. They just want it medium heat, but they completely blank on the word warm.
Just completely gone.
Right. The word is in their brain, but the file is locked. So panicking and sweating, they awkwardly settle for saying not too hot and just walk away in absolute shame.
Oh man, they feel like they've failed a fundamental human test. But what's crucial to understand here is that fluency isn't a storage problem.
Right.
You don't just need more words piled up in a database in your head. You need an architecture to structure your thoughts in real time. And the sources offer a brilliant mechanical solution for this called the three-step formula.
Let's get into that.
Yeah.
The first layer of that architecture is the pyramid method.
Right.
Instead of trying to construct a massive, complex paragraph in your head before you open your mouth, you just start with a tiny tip of the pyramid. A simple, undeniable sentence like, I like coffee.
Keep it super simple.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Once you've successfully spoken that truth, you expand downward, building the base using who, where, why, and how. I like coffee because I need it to jumpstart my brain, where I usually go to this little corner cafe. I would take it with just a splash of oat milk.
You're letting the architecture pull the vocabulary out of you rather than the other way around. It builds a conversational foundation on the fly.
That makes so much sense.
The second step addresses the connective tissue. They call it using bridges. Native speakers rarely change subjects abruptly. They extend the architecture using invisible linguistic threads.
Phrases like, speaking of which.
Yes, or, that actually reminds me of. These mechanical phrases allow you to seamlessly shift topics to ground you're more comfortable with.
So you never hit a conversational dead end.
Exactly.
I want to look at the third step, though, because it feels a bit counterintuitive to me. The sources talk about managing the panic of pausing, and they suggest using cool fillers. But if I'm trying to process a thought, isn't pausing and saying, or just a deeply ingrained biological reflex to buy time?
Well, biologically, yes, your brain is stalling for time to fetch the data, but sociologically, the specific sound of is a signal of defeat.
Really? Defeat?
Yeah. When you say, you signal to the listener that you're lost, and you inadvertently hand over your turn to speak. The alternative, the cool fillers, changes the power dynamic entirely.
So by pausing and saying, how can I put this? Or to be perfectly honest,
Yeah.
you're still stalling for those exact same 2 seconds of mental RAM.
Exactly.
But instead of looking panicked, you've signaled deep thoughtfulness. You kept your hands on the steering wheel while hitting the brakes.
That's a great way to put it. You're using a linguistic framework to keep the social panic out. And for you, the listener, the takeaway here is that mistakes are simply proof of engagement.
Absolutely.
By practicing small daily habits like listening to connected speech, where words naturally blend together in the real world, like what you're doing, you slowly build this conversational architecture.
Okay, so that's a framework for surviving a low-stakes coffee shop interaction.
But what happens when the panic isn't about ordering a warm drink, but about the nature of being alive?
Oh, that's a pivot. Right. If linguistics is the architecture for conversational panic, what is the architecture for existential panic? Let's turn to the life of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha.
Yeah, this raises an extraordinary point about how we construct our internal reality and what happens when that construction violently collapses.
Because his early life was the ultimate manufactured framework.
Exactly. His father, the king, built a flawless, literal palace to act as an architectural shield against the human condition. Siddhartha was hidden from aging, sickness, and death.
But you just can't keep reality out forever.
No, you can't.
The sources describe his chariot rides outside the palace walls, where he experienced a profound, world-shattering shock. He witnessed what are known as the four sights.
Right, an old man, a sick man, a dead body, and finally a peaceful, holy man.
In an instant, his illusion of a safe, permanent reality evaporated. The existential panic set in because he realized the empty room of mortality was waiting for him.
And his immediate reaction was an intense overcorrection. He swung from complete sheltered luxury to the absolute extreme of self-mortification.
He joined ascetic monks, right?
Yeah, and subjected himself to intense starvation. The texts describe him meditating to the point where his ribs looked like the rafters of a ruined house or a dry tree in winter.
Wow.
He mistakenly believed that by destroying his physical framework, he could destroy the suffering attached to it.
And he nearly killed himself doing it. The turning point, according to the sources, is so deeply human.
It really is.
He's essentially dying by a river, and a young village girl named Sugatada offers him a simple bowl of sweet rice with milk.
And accepting that meal cost him everything socially. His 5 ascetic friends abandoned him in disgust, thinking he was giving up.
But that bowl of rice saved his life, and it triggered the realization of the middle way.
Yeah, the middle way is the vital framework of balance. It's the realization that neither indulging in every sensory pleasure nor destroying yourself with pain will solve the problem of existence.
So what happens next?
After accepting this physical nourishment, he sat under the Bodhi tree, defeated the internal psychological manifestations of fear and desire, personified as the demon Mara, and constructed a new psychological architecture for humanity.
The Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path.
Precisely. He built a framework acknowledging that suffering is an inherent part of the design and that its root is in our attachment.
Okay, let's drill into that word attachment, because I think modern audiences hear that the goal of Buddhism is detachment, and they immediately picture an emotional robot.
Right, a common misconception.
Does this framework demand that you just stop caring about your family, your passions, or your life?
Not at all, and this is a crucial distinction. Detachment doesn't mean apathy. It means understanding the mechanics of impermanence. The suffering doesn't come from loving things. The suffering comes from the delusion that things won't change.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think of it like surfing. Attachment isn't refusing to ride the wave out of fear it will end. Attachment is trying to freeze the water so you never fall off.
And, obviously, if you try to freeze the ocean, you're going to drown.
Exactly. The middle way is learning the mechanics of balance on the board, while the water constantly shifts and moves beneath you. You experience the ride fully, but you don't cling to the water.
You structure your mind to handle the chaos of change without breaking. It's a brilliant internal architecture. But let's shift from the internal to the external.
Okay.
How do these frameworks scale up? We've looked at the mind, but how do you build a literal, physical and cultural reality from scratch.
Mm.
How do you architect an entire nation?
Well, we can see this mechanics of construction perfectly by looking at the history of the United Kingdom. It is essentially a massive, chaotic, multi-generational group project.
Built through layers of invasion, friction, and integration.
Right. And it starts with literal physical isolation.
Yeah, Britain wasn't always an island.
Mm-hmm.
It was physically connected to mainland Europe by a land bridge called Doggerland.
Mm.
But at the end of the last ice age, the ice melted. The sea levels rose, and it was violently severed from the continent. That geological event created the foundational physical boundary.
From there, the cultural architecture is laid down in distinct layers, not entirely unlike how you lay the foundation of a house. The Romans arrive in 43 AD.
And they don't just conquer, right? They impose a structural grid.
Exactly. They lay down thousands of miles of straight, paved roads, establish the centralized hub of Londinium, and introduce stone architecture.
Though they faced fierce resistance, notably from Queen Boudica.
They did, but by the time the Romans leave in 410 AD, the physical blueprint of civilization is permanently etched into the dirt.
Then you have the conceptual layers. The Vikings arrive around 793 AD. Initially, they're just raiding the coastline for treasure, bringing absolute chaos.
Right, but eventually they settle and integrate. And the profound insight from the sources is how they altered the conceptual architecture of the island. They didn't just leave behind ruins, they left behind everyday language.
Language is the ultimate invisible framework. The Vikings gave the English language words that structure basic human reality. Words like sky, egg, window, husband, and anger.
They gave the Anglo-Saxons the linguistic tools to describe their daily lives.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the next major architectural shift. Power dynamics. In 1066, William the Conqueror and the Normans arrive.
The Battle of Hastings.
Exactly. They don't just build massive stone castles to dominate the landscape. They fundamentally alter the structure of society by injecting French, legal, and aristocratic vocabulary into the culture.
This creates a fascinating linguistic class divide that actually still echoes today.
Really? How so?
Well, the Anglo-Saxon peasants working the fields used their Germanic words for the animals: cow, pig, sheep. But the Norman aristocrats eating the meals in the dining hall used French terms: beef, pork, mutton.
Oh, wow. So the language itself became an architecture of class and power.
Precisely.
So the English language that causes so much agonizing cognitive overload for the learners in our first segment, it's not a single pure system.
Not at all.
It's a chaotic historical mashup of Roman infrastructure, Viking daily life, and French aristocracy. It's three distinct cultural frameworks stacked in a trench coat.
That is exactly what it is. It's the ultimate integrated architecture. And you see this pattern of structural adaptation continue. It's not just kings and battles.
Right. Take the Magna Carta in 1215. We often think of it just as a historical document, but mechanically, it was a shift in the psychological blueprint of power.
It transitioned the reality of rule from divine, unquestionable right to a contractual obligation subject to law.
The nation keeps absorbing shocks and building new load-bearing walls. The absolute demographic devastation of the Black Death completely reorders labor structures.
Wars of the Roses, the Tudor era.
Henry VIII creating the Church of England.
Yes, and then the Industrial Revolution throws up a framework of factories and rail lines. The shared trauma of the world wars ultimately leads to the creation of the NHS in 1948, a new architectural pillar of social welfare.
The UK's reality evolved organically over millennia of geography, conflict, and compromise.
It is the slow tectonic shifting of societal frameworks, which actually provides an incredible contrast to our final source material.
Yes, because if UK history is the slow, organic growth of reality, our final source shows us how modern leaders attempt to instantly synthesize reality and project power using carefully engineered rhetoric.
Okay, let's get into it.
We're looking at Donald Trump's January 2026 speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And just to be totally clear for everyone listening, our goal today isn't to debate the politics, the politicians, or the policies here.
No, not at all.
We are purely looking under the hood at the mechanics of the rhetoric. We want to understand how language is being actively used to move the levers of global power.
Right. It is a masterclass in rhetorical architecture. When you look at the transcript, Trump's style completely breaks the standard framework of a Davos address.
He isn't adopting the tone of an academic reading a nuanced white paper.
No, he uses the blunt, symbolic storytelling of a businessman. He bypasses complex economic theory and uses vivid phrasing, like calling alternative energy initiatives a green news scam, to violently establish a specific premise.
That cheap, traditional oil and gas energy is the only viable foundation for a strong society.
Exactly.
What blew my mind looking at the transcript is that he uses the exact same mechanical bridge technique we talked about in the English language segment.
He really does.
But he does it on a geopolitical scale. He starts by arguing that high energy costs are suffocating the middle class. He then seamlessly bridges that economic pressure to the family unit, arguing it's making it too expensive to have children, which leads to falling birth rates.
And then he bridges the falling birth rates to the necessity of global migration to fill the labor gaps.
It's all connected.
In a matter of minutes, he connects energy policy, family planning, and border control into a single, unbreakable logical chain for his audience.
He builds a cohesive worldview. And once that worldview is established, he starts pulling the levers of power within it. The sources detail how he discusses tariffs.
Yeah, this is interesting. In traditional economic frameworks, a tariff is just a tax policy. In this rhetorical framework, a tariff is a blunt instrument of leverage.
It's a tool designed to inflict enough pain to force international companies to physically relocate their factories into the United States.
The mechanism of leverage is made explicit through the anecdotes he chooses to share. The sources highlight a moment where he describes confronting a European leader over NATO defense spending.
He doesn't appeal to shared democratic values or historical alliances. He threatens massive tariffs on luxury goods, specifically aiming at their cultural pride, their wine and champagne.
Right. He uses their economic pressure points to architect a new security reality.
It is transactional diplomacy stripped of all pretense. But the most striking structural move in the entire speech, the ultimate attempt to overwrite reality, was his proposal regarding Greenland.
Oh, the Greenland proposal.
The moment that dominated the headlines. He stands in front of the global elite and asserts that the United States wants right, title, and ownership of Greenland to secure its posture against rivals like Russia and China.
And the justification he uses is pure, unfiltered real estate logic.
He simply states, you cannot defend a lease.
This raises a profound point about how reality is dictated in the modern era. By speaking in these massive disruptive headlines rather than diplomatic footnotes, he completely bypasses the traditional slow-moving mechanisms of statecraft.
He walks into a room defined by cautious, globalist consensus, and he forces everyone to react to his framework.
Right.
By using raw directness, he creates a psychological architecture of order and unyielding strength for his supporters, while simultaneously generating a chaotic urgency and fear for his critics.
He doesn't ask permission to change the global market. He dictates the new terms of reality simply by speaking them into existence on a global stage.
It's wild. When we synthesize all of these sources, a remarkable picture emerges. We started with the micro frameworks,
the linguistic pyramids, bridges, and cool fillers that rescue our brains from the processing failure of a coffee shop interaction.
Then we moved to the Buddha's philosophical architecture, the middle way, which provides the balance needed to survive the crushing impermanence of existence.
We tracked the literal, physical, and cultural architecture of the United Kingdom, watching how a nation absorbs foreign infrastructure, Viking vocabulary, and Norman law into a single, cohesive island reality.
And finally, we decoded the synthetic architecture of Davos, observing how modern rhetorical frameworks are engineered to project power and bend global economies to a single will.
The underlying truth here is that reality is not just the weather. It is not something that merely happens to us.
Reality is actively constructed. It is built by the words we choose to speak, the philosophical paths we decide to walk, and the layered histories we inherit.
We are always constantly building the frameworks that define our world.
So what does this all mean for you? Well, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We have spent this deep dive exploring how our entire reality, our social confidence, our existential peace of mind, the borders of our nations, and the shifting tides of global leverage is constructed by human language and human narratives.
Right.
So what happens when artificial intelligence begins writing those narratives? What happens when generative models are the ones designing the linguistic frameworks, writing the political speeches, and structuring the information ecosystem?
That is a terrifying thought.
When the algorithm officially becomes the architect, whose reality will we actually be living in?
That is the ultimate uncharted frontier of human architecture.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. I hope you take these ideas and keep questioning the frameworks around you. And remember, whenever you feel panicked, overwhelmed, or lost, you're just standing in an empty room. You have the power to put down a rug, pull up a chair, and build the architecture of your own reality. See you next time.